What's going on, Imperials? It's Emperor Cubone here. A Pokemon's name has a lot of power, either letting it stick in the minds of fans forever, or cause the Pokemon to be eternally ridiculed. However, with so many Pokemon, you're bound to have some of them draw from similar inspirations, and have their names derived from the same root words. Obviously, this is not merely sounding alike, such as coughing and cough-agregus. While they sound close, they are not conveying the same ideas here. But a Pokemon can take the same word and do vastly different things with it. So, I was wondering, what is the most common basis for a Pokemon's name across the franchise? Now, this has to be an actual word. You can't just use a suffix like Eon for all of the evolutions, and that also wouldn't make it related to Empoleon or Charmeleon or even regular Leon, because even though they sound the same, it's not trying to come from the same root. So starting out, there are plenty of Pokemon that share the same inspirations with one other, like what made me think of this idea in the first place, Frost. The word Frost is a prominent part of the Pokemon Frostlass, but also Frostmoth. Both being ice types, obviously, but I really thought that it would be more. It seems like such an obvious title for the world of ice-type Pokemon. So I'm not gonna list off every set of 2 Pokemon that share a common thread, because there are a lot of them, and most of them are related. However, it is worth noting that certain names are similar in what they get across, but are not actually the same word. For instance, there are 3 Pokemon that use the term arachnid as part of their name over the years, but there are 2 Pokemon with spider in their name instead, which is basically the same thing, but it is a clearly distinct word. And on top of that, there are 2 more that specifically offshoot of tarantula. So while they all convey similar ideas, they are individual words that do not count under the same banner. So it bears pointing out that discrepancy. And of course, this goes without saying, but we will be covering the English names of the Pokemon only, but feel free to enlighten us with other languages down in the comments if you so desire. So when looking at the pools of shared naming conventions, we find that there are dozens of words that appear in 3 different Pokemon species names, and this is by no means an exhaustive list, although this is largely made up of already related Pokemon with maybe a lone third entry somewhere else. So it's not entirely impressive to have 3 distinct Pokemon to have, say, the term Mud in their name, when one of them directly evolves from another. And that just leaves Mudkip as the only other one in this group, and this pattern can be seen all over with different shared names, so let's move on to groups of much higher numbers that are more interesting overall. For the most part. I mean, we do still have words like Pigeon, which makes the list just because of the entire Pidgey line, plus Pidove, so that's really just an extension of the 3 groupings. And the same thing actually happens with Cole, too, but all of those Pokemon are really cool, so I don't actually mind it as much. But there's also the Apple crowd, who are all from just one Pokemon family, so that's not too fun. We also have the Ninja names, which really only is the Nincada line plus the Frog, and then the expected 4 Pokemon that use Ursa in their names, all of them bears, but only one of them is not directly related to the others. Though we also see Moth with 4 different Pokemon, clearly based on a particular insect, but speaking of, there are also 4 Pokemon to be based off of the word cocoon, and they get the job done, though of course this excludes the pupa names, who are synonymous, but it is a different word, so they're just different enough. The word ape has 4 Pokemon under its banner, all of whom are monkey adjacent, and like it are the 4 Pokemon that have some form of bunny in their name. There are of course other Pokemon that use rabbit, but that is distinct from the bunny derivations. And since we're on animal groups, there are 4 fish Pokemon as well. Despite there being plenty of fish-bodied Pokemon, very few of them use that in their name. And even though the Galar fossils don't spell fish properly, we know what they're trying to get across, being half-ancient sea creature. There are 4 Pokemon that use snow in their names, only 2 of them being related, but I thought that there would be more. And of course there are 4 Toge names, which means spiky in Japanese, so maybe you would say that shouldn't count, but there are also 4 reptile names, all of whom are lizards, which is a shame because there are other types of reptiles that could get in on the action. 4 Pokemon also use tail in their names, which you would think might show up more because there are hundreds of Pokemon with tails, but I suppose these are the only ones that are prominent enough to have that be their defining trait. Likewise, there are 4 shell names in Pokémon, which is really funny because one of them doesn't even actually have a shell. And there are also 4 Pokémon that utilize meow in their name somehow, all of them being cats obviously, but you could make an argument that Mew and Mewtwo are somewhat named for meow as well, since they are vaguely feline. However, allegedly they are named for mutant instead, so we will leave them out of this current group. So those are all of the names that have 4 Pokémon share the same word. Well, except for Tapu, I guess, but that's more of a title than anything. So the next tier would be groups of 5 Pokémon, and we'll start not far from the last time, with Purr potentially being on 5 Pokémon. Still cat-themed, of course, although it seems a bit of a stretch to include Persian in that with the rest of them. It literally is spelled like the Persian breed of cat, so I think that's enough of a reference without the double meaning. So I would be willing to move this one down to 4. Another that's on the borderline is tree names, largely being some of the grass types that you would expect, but I do think that Xurkitree also counts. Not only does it literally have the word tree at the end, but I have to believe it's an intentional nod to this Ultra Beast resembling a Christmas tree. So I would accept Xurkitree sitting out, but I still think it's good enough to stick with the others. But close to it, we have 5 leaf Pokémon, who are also grass types. I guess it's not too surprising, but you would think that maybe flower or bush or some other plant-based words would also show up somewhere here. But we do also have some crossover with the word quill that has 5 Pokémon using it, including grass, but also poison and even fire, all of whom have their spikes on full display. But speaking of fire, there's the word char with 5 Pokémon, so that's a lot of burning going on. That is of course bolstered by the Charmander line taking up most of it, but it's still slightly less boring than the Magma group that's only split between 2 lines of Pokémon, so it's quite narrow despite its higher placement. Although it is worth noting that we do have 1 Pokémon named for lava, and then 2 more of them that use volcano in their names, so there are some adjacent terms floating around out there. But like Magma, the word centipede has 5 Pokémon in tow, but of course it's also only across 2 lines, both of them being bug types with many legs, as you might expect. It could be Millipede, but come on, let's just play it safe and lump them all together. Then the word toxic also has 5 names that use it. As you might imagine, this is popular among various poison-type Pokémon, which I'm sure is just as startling as Arctic being used on 5 different ice-type names across the series so far. But this one seems to have a bit more variety in how it's used, so I appreciate that. The word Volt also comes up 5 different times, and you already know that these are electric types, except for Volbeat as the one outlier, so that's interesting, I guess. And I am counting the Zolt fossils here too. However, there are also 3 Bolt Pokémon that are basically the same thing, and there are also 2 Jolt Pokémon, but we can't count any of those. And aside from that last part, we have the exact same boat, with the rock names having 5, big showing for the rock types here of course, but there are also 3 Stone Pokémon as well, so that's just the same thing but with a different name. Now this one might be up in the air, but tentatively there are 5 Pokémon with Ghost in their name, and I'm saying this because of these specific words, Gast and Geist, being transliterations and offshoots of the actual word Ghost. But if you want to protest it, I understand. That just leaves the final word, Toad, with 5 Pokémon. This has some of the frogs you would expect, and yes, 2 of these are mushrooms, but that mushroom is named from the actual animal Toad anyway, so they all share the same actual root. The tiers get much smaller now since I only found 2 groupings of 6 Pokémon, starting with Bat. No one will be surprised at the Pokémon that show up here, various bats from all over the generations, but more interesting is the second group that use star in their names. Most of them are related, but Lord Helix deserves a shout out since the tentacles around its face definitely display a star shape, so I have to believe that's intentional. There are actually more with 7 Pokémon each, starting with Sand. We see this on many ground-type families across the years, which makes sense because it gets everywhere, but there's also some overlap with 7 crocodile-related Pokémon. Of course, Sandile bridges that gap, but we also have its evolutions. And you could say that Fuecoco shouldn't count since it's a little bit far out there, and I could see that, but the inspiration is clear, so I think it fits in with the rest. And I was actually stunned that there is still only 1 alligator Pokemon. Sticking with reptiles, we have 7 Pokemon that use turtle in their names. Once again, obviously the Pokemon that you would expect are here with their cute little shells and all that, but we all know that there are 3 more tortoise Pokemon on top of it, so let's hope that we see more of them in the future because they are all awesome. And you might not think of the final group, but King is used in 7 Pokemon names as well. It used to only be 6 of them, which was a full team, so that was great. However, King Gambit is also a good enough addition, so I guess I won't complain all that much. Now, I could be missing something, but from what I could find, there are no 8 or 9 groupings of shared name origins, which takes us up to 10. That's quite a lot, but the first one is actually pretty boring since it's just the word iron. And yes, that means all of the future Paradox Pokemon are here. The identical naming convention is quite dull compared to the exotic past versions of Paradox forms, but it's fairly dystopian for every Pokemon to share half of the same name. However, there is a real collection of 10 names that share the same root word, that being electricity. It's almost a bit strange to have the most common word of a type be that type's name, but we have the entirety of the Electabuzz line and of course the Manectric line, with the only Pokemon to use the latter half of the word being Toxtricity. However, Regieleki also deserves a mention as the standout embodiment of this word, but would you believe me if I told you that 10 wasn't even the highest number? There is indeed one word that is the undisputed most popular to use in Pokemon names, and that is of course Dragon, where I count 16. Once again, these are mainly Dragon types, however not all of them, like Seadra or Drapion, who use the term to appear more intimidating while lacking the type itself, although maybe other wild Pokemon don't know that and they can use it to trick them. And while this accounts for any usage of the word, whether it be the draw part anywhere in the name, to the gone section at the end, which more Pokemon honestly have than I thought, I was still very conservative on this tabulation, leaving out any other deviation of the word. No Drake, no Drago, nothing besides a reasonable interpretation that a name could be derived from the original dragon. Like, sure, Dreepy could get the start of its name from Draco or something, but we would have to make a few leaps in logic. I mean, it's a creepy dragon, so that's its name. And we know why it counts over something like a Porygon or a Hydrapple instead. So it's a bit funny that Dragon is apparently the most popular category name of Pokemon, and the most common name origin as well, despite being one of the rarest types overall. I guess being a dragon is such an overriding feature that you have to tell everyone about it as much as you possibly can. And again, I could have missed something, but as far as I could tell, these are the biggest groupings of Pokemon names that share the same root words. I find Pokemon etymology to be fascinating, but this is liable to change with time as we get new Pokemon added. So what do you think of the pocket monsters made to have the same names? Let me know your favorite down in the comments. Also be sure to leave a like, share this video, and subscribe so that you too can become an Imperial today. And until next time, stay grounded.